Welcome back. Time is short. Let's spend some with the muse. Today, let's see how we can go from a story prompt to a fleshed out plot for a story. There's a method to it, and it's like playing improv, one step at a time. We'll start with our story prompt. In a pre-industrial world where magic is a significant part of the economy, there's a new Lord Suzerain who has built a magical library, perhaps the largest in the world. He sends forth agents, both in his own lands and beyond, to buy magical spellbooks from their owners. In this transaction, the deal is that the owner is paid handsomely, and the owner is also given a handmade copy of their magical book, which is still magical, though the original must stay in the Suzerain's library. But something is happening. Books are disappearing from the library. Patrons are being injured in magical outbursts. It seems that putting so many magical tomes in close proximity is having an unexpected, emergent effect. Now, we don't have an actual story here. We just have a story prompt. A story has characters, a protagonist, a stage or set places where the tale unfolds, a series of problems to overcome, a heart's desire to protect, and perhaps a sacrifice to be made. How do we get from the prompt to the basic structure of a story without making endless notes and pondering for hours or filling out and discarding dozens of index cards? It doesn't have to be that hard. By following some simple story rules, you can start knowing nothing about your story and work your way from beginning to end in a short time, less than an hour in most cases. What you come up with won't always be a brilliant tale, but more often than not, it will be better than the average story most editors see in their submission piles. And if you learn to do this quickly, you could create half a dozen plots in an afternoon and choose the one you like best to work on. As an editor, the first thing I want is a sense of where the story is taking place. I think of it as the curtain being pulled back on a stage. What do I see on that stage? Who is there? What are they doing? Though necessarily brief, I want a sense of their life in the everyday world that they inhabit. When I think of our story prompt today, the first thing that came to mind was an aging woman sitting at a table writing a letter. The woman and her surroundings speak of a medieval European world, most likely a different history than ours, but one where magic is real. Her house is neither a hovel nor a palace. It is a comfortable abode on the outskirts of a village. Who is the elderly woman writing the letter? While we're not going to write all of this into the manuscript at the beginning, now is a good time to define the character for ourselves. Because as we move forward to set up hurdles, endanger her heart's desire, and fashion a climax, it's very important to know about our character. As I said, the details we decide on now don't get written up in a big block of exposition at the beginning of the manuscript. They will reveal themselves over time, as appropriate in the story. But we, as writers, need to know her name is Beatrice Charmer. She is older, in her 60s, and in good health. Her husband passed away years ago, and in a world without social safety nets, she struggles to maintain her modest standard of living. Her most prized possession is a book of magic in which she and her husband had to invest to start their small business, which they called Penny Fortunes. She cannot manage all the same spells her husband could, but enough to make a small income. Who is she writing to when she's writing that letter? Beatrice is writing to her daughter, Elsbeth. To inject a little magic early on, let's have her transmit the letter magically, an ancient version of texting. And wait a moment, but no reply comes, not even an acknowledgement of receipt. Now we know two key things. Beatrice has a magical book she relies on to make her daily bread. We'll call it the Codex of Copper Wishes. And she has a daughter, Elsbeth, one she obviously misses, but who is away and uncommunicative. At this point, it's very important to know that I don't have any idea what's going to happen next. This is not a story in my head which I'm trying to put down on paper. I'm proceeding from the story prompt in an organized fashion that will get me to the goal of having a workable story outline or plot. I'm not starting with a character and trying to give them a story. I started with a prompt and a scene. I'm not starting with a climax and working my way back to see how we got there. Approaches like that may work very well for some, and I call that plotting by problem solving. But today, we're doing improv, so we just follow the rules one step at a time. Once we open the curtains on our scene and have a sense of our character, it's time for the inciting incident. This is a piece of action which signals to the reader the chase is afoot. The story has begun. In our case, there's a clap of hands and the pounding of a staff on the doorframe, the medieval equivalent of knocking. The visitor is an official and uniformed representative of the suzerain's library guard. Next, we move from a simple incident to understanding how our protagonist will be drawn personally into the story. That's the narrative hook. The suzerain's representative is here because he has heard of penny fortunes and is inquiring about any magical books in Beatrice's possession. She may demur, but he has an inventory scroll. He knows she's the owner of the Codex of Copper Wishes. She tries again, claiming it is an old book, and over time its magic has gone threadbare, and it weakens with each spell cast. The library guardsman is unmoved. He is prepared to make a handsome offer for the book. While the original must stay in the suzerain's library, a copy of equal magic will be returned to Beatrice. And this concludes the beginning of our story. We're now going to move into the try-fail cycle. The middle of our story is comprised of 3 individual problems and the protagonist's attempt to overcome them. This try-fail cycle is a narrative pattern where a character attempts to solve a problem or achieve a goal, fails, and then tries again, each time with increasing stakes or difficulty. It also works best if every time the protagonist thinks they have solved the problem before them, they have really just helped to complicate matters and make the situation worse. We'll refer to our try-fail cycle as Problem 1, Problem 2, and Problem 3. As a note, Problem 3 will either be our story climax or lead directly into our story climax. Problem 1. While the offer for the book is real and reliable, Beatrice knows the practical realities. The funds will last her a year or two, but after that, she has no way to earn her daily living without the book. And the reputation of the replacement copies the library provides are not stellar. She cannot be assured that there will be the magic she needs in the duplicate, nor that she will be its master. It becomes clear, though, that she does not have any choice. But she makes a bargain. She will take half the fee if she is permitted to go to the suzerain's library and supervise the library scriptor assigned to creating her copy. Though frightened, Beatrice stands her ground. The library guardsman is intrigued. He may be able to pocket the difference, or at least get a promotion. He agrees, then asks, almost casually, "Beatrice Charmer. There is, if I'm not mistaken, an Elsbeth Charmer on staff at the suzerain's library. A witch with a termagant's temperament. A relation of yours?" "Why, yes, that's my daughter," says Beatrice, a little surprised that her daughter is on staff at the famous library. "Well then," says the guardsman, "even more reason for a small exception to be made in your case. Have the book and yourself ready for travel on the morrow. We return to the thaumaturgical treasury." In Problem 1, a difficult issue has been presented for the protagonist, but she has stood her ground and reasoned her way out of it. Things did not seem too difficult, and the story is moving on. Problem 2. At the start, keep in mind that whatever challenges Problem 2 presents, they must be significantly worse in magnitude and threat than Problem 1. The trip to the thaumaturgical treasury is uneventful. Beatrice is set up to work with a library scriptor, and her daughter is notified of her arrival. But her daughter does not come to visit. After a time, bad things start to happen at the library. Cataloged books cannot be found. Valuable tomes are disappearing. Strange new works are appearing that have not been recorded, and no one can master their magic. A tome tender is frightened out of her wits by something she cannot describe, and an assistant archivist is killed, torn apart by magical forces deep in the cryptic repository. As a new arrival with a special deal to have a magical book copied under her supervision, and a daughter already employed at the library, suspicion falls on both Beatrice and Elspeth. Beatrice finally has her reunion, and it is not a happy one. Elsbeth calls her to her office to make her aware of how serious the situation is. Charges are being filed. Elsbeth is likely to be dismissed. Beatrice's book will be destroyed without a copy having been made. The solution to problem 2 is to work together, despite their differences, solving the mystery at the library and clearing their names. Upon this task, they quickly embark. Somewhere in this story area, we could use a bit of exposition to fill in the backstory of Beatrice and Elspeth. A little exposition interlude. What split them apart to begin with? I'm going to go with magical rivalry. Elspeth may have shown greater magical talent from a young age, causing jealousy and resentment from Beatrice, who struggled to master the spells in the family's magical book. This fits with what we already know about Beatrice and her limited abilities and fears. This led to a competitive relationship rather than a nurturing one. Problem 3. In this section, leading directly to the climax, Beatrice and Elspeth work together to confront the newly arisen dangers in the library. They start by cataloging the missing books and the new unknown books, and then visiting each shelf space in the library where these books should be or are now. They find detritus on the shelves where the missing book should have been, and Beatrice detects the death aura of those books. She knows they were consumed by something. Elsbeth finds where the new books are coming from. They are attached to old books like leeches. They are being formed as they consume the old works, and when the old works die, they ensorcel a tome tender to take them deeper into the library. Other archivists are, unknowingly, removing old books from the library as if removing them from danger. Stranger still, they find some of the newer books fall apart at a touch, as though the book they sought to consume used its power to destroy the attacker. In the cryptic repository, Beatrice and Elspeth find shelves filled with newly created magical tomes. They come to understand that never in history have so many magical books been collected in one space so closely. This has had an unexpected emergent effect. New magics are being born and are competitive with the old. There is a war of magical books going on. Beatrice realizes there is a spell in the Codex of Copper Wishes that might aid this situation. A reconciliation spell that her husband knew well, but she was never able to master. If Elsbeth can, it might save the day. Elsbeth realizes that the amount of power necessary to use the reconciliation spell for their purposes will focus so much power through the book that it might destroy it. But Beatrice understands that this must be done. Now we are into the climax. The climax is the battle of the Codex of Copper Wishes against the out-of-control magic of the library. Not only is the book endangered, but so are Beatrice and Elspeth, as they are caught in the middle between the combating forces of the old and the new. This, they realize, is how the deaths of the tome tenders and assistant archivists occurred. When these unfortunates became caught between the battling magics, they suffered lethal injury. In the midst of this fight, I'll bring back the library guardsmen from the beginning of the story at the head of a troop of guards ordered to arrest Beatrice and Elspeth. But they arrive in time to see what is really happening. The spell works, exploding out into the library and ending the war of books, but the Codex of Copper Wishes is destroyed. The denouement. This is the falling action of the story, what happens after the climax. Elspeth is able to convince the Librarian Council, known as the Arcane Assembly, that magical books must not only be archived by the Mystic Codex catalog, but also spaced appropriately, so that their magical auras no longer overlap. Elspeth is able to offer her mother a position at the library, while they will work together to develop a system for finding the appropriate spacing for powerful books and experiment with creating new books in a controlled environment. Mother and daughter are reunited. Beatrice's future in her old age is assured. Summary. Once more, I'll remind you, the key thing in this exercise is that all of these ideas were made up in order as we went. I had no idea how this story was going to work out until I moved through each step of the improv order, which is story prompt, orientation, character, inciting incident, narrative hook, problem 1, problem 2, problem 3, climax, and denouement. For me at least, working stories in this way is almost as much fun as reading, with your imagination putting the story together as you go. Also, this sort of thing can be done in an hour or two. And obviously, this is just one path to take from the original story prompt. If you're not happy with the first one, do a second and a third and a fifth. Pick the one you like best to write. What did you come up with? Tell me in the comments. I think I like this one enough to actually write it. I'll let you know how that goes in future videos. Oh, I never gave it a title. That's a whole art in itself, but for now we'll call it either The Vanishing Tomes or The Codex of Copper Wishes. Until next time, remember, time is short. Let's spend some with the Muse.